Ready? All right. My name is Adam Collins, and I'm here to talk about OpenHAB, which is a piece of software that you can use to control any of the home automation type things that you have going on in your house. So if you have some home automation stuff, you probably already have an app for that particular brand of light switch, or that Hue light bulb or something like that. So why would you want to use OpenHAB? And the main reason that I wanted to use it was because it allows your different devices to talk to each other no matter who made them. Also, it can run on pretty much anything. So if you've got Windows, Linux, Mac, whatever you've got, you can pretty much run it on anything. It's open source, so if you've ever been curious about what's going on under the hood, you can go to the GitHub account and take a look yourself. And also they have a free cloud service that you can use to communicate with all your stuff from outside your home network if you choose to. So the main reason that I wanted to use it is because it's always been a concern of mine with home automation stuff of getting any sort of like vendor lock-in where I buy this brand of stuff and it only works with that brand, and then that company goes out of business and now I've got a bunch of stuff that I can't use anymore. So I really wanted to be able to have my home automation devices talk to each other. And so I first bought this thing, which is called a Vera Lite, and it's a Z-Wave hub. So it controls Z-Wave devices. So I bought that, and I bought a bunch of Z-Wave light switches, and I could control those light switches with that. And it comes with an app that you can install on your phone or on your computer, and it works pretty well. But then I decided to use one of our Raspberry Pis to make a garage door opener. I looked at Z-Wave garage door openers, and they were all too expensive, and I already had some Pis laying around, so I wanted to make that a project to do, and I got that working. But it doesn't use Z-Wave, it communicates over Wi-Fi. I hit a URL running on that, on a server running on that Raspberry Pi to open the garage door, and hit a different URL to close it. And so I wanted these to talk to each other. I wanted to, be able to control them both through one interface, rather than having to open the Vera app to control my light switches and then go to a web browser to control the Raspberry Pi. And also it would be good to maybe, if I wanted to have them interact with each other, so when the garage door opens, have the Vera turn some lights on or something like that. I wanted that to happen, but that was not really possible. You supposedly can extend the functionality of that particular Z-Wave hub that I got, but I couldn't really figure out how to do it. The documentation wasn't very good. So that's where OpenHAB comes in. OpenHAB, you install that, you tell it how to communicate with your Raspberry Pi, you tell it how to communicate with your Z-Wave hub or whatever you've got, and now those are all together in one interface and they can interact with each other. Like I said, it can run on pretty much anything, Linux, Windows, Mac. You can install it on a Raspberry Pi. They've got a image that you can just throw on an SD card and pop in your Raspberry Pi and have everything pretty much set up already. They've got Docker containers. It works on Synology devices. It's pretty widely supported. They support a lot of different platforms. Also, it's open source. There's the GitHub link for the project, and the OpenHAB server that you install on your computer is open source, and so is the iOS app and the Android app, and the cloud service website is open source as well. So if you wanted to make any changes or modify it or see how it works, you're free to go take a look and contribute to it if you want. Also, it has the free cloud service, which I use to be able to control my stuff from outside the house if I want to. The Z-Wave hub that I got had a similar cloud service, but that only worked with the Z-Wave stuff, and this works with everything that's set up in it. So if you decide that you want to use OpenHAB to control your home automation devices, how do you set it up? First thing you do is you go to the OpenHAB website and download it at that link. Then you would install it, and there's a documentation, depending on if you're installing it Linux, Mac, Windows, whatever, it'll guide you through how to do that. And then I would recommend reading the documentation. There's quite a bit of documentation for it. I kind of jumped in and tried to start doing things before I really understood how it all worked, and that led to hours of frustration. Now that I've gotten used to it, it's easier to make changes and tweak things, but at first it was kind of frustrating. And then pretty much any change or anything you want to do in OpenHAB is going to be involving opening up a text file in Notepad or something like that and making changes to the configuration. And there's a bunch of them. So that's why I recommend going to the documentation page and reading up and making sure you understand things before you just jump in and start changing values like I did. So just to go over a little bit about how OpenHAB does what it does, it communicates with all the different types of devices that you might have on your network, and it does that through something called bindings, which is just a bit of code that tells OpenHAB, how do I communicate with Z-Wave devices? How do I communicate with things over HTTP? From the user perspective, you just go to the interface of your OpenHAB server and tell it, I want to download and install the HTTP binding or the Z-Wave binding, and it installs that, and now your OpenHAB server can do that communication. Since it's all open source, though, if there's something you want to control that doesn't have a binding yet, feel free to go ahead and make one, or probably find someone online who's already working on it that you can help out there. But they do have a ton. There's just a few listed here: Z-Wave, HTTP, ecobee, Hue, Chromecast, all kinds of different things. If you go to the bindings list on their website, it scrolls for a little bit, and you can probably find what you want to control on there. And if not, you can probably find in the forum someone who's working on it. So that tells OpenHAB how to communicate with things. The next thing you need to do is set up your items. So now it knows how to communicate with things. Now you're telling it what are the things you want to communicate with. So in that, just a quick little example here. So a line in that config file for an item would typically look like this. So you'd tell it what kind of item it is. Is it a switch? Is it a dimmer? Is it a sensor? All kinds of stuff like that. You give it a name that you'll use to refer to that item in other configuration files. Give it a friendly name. You can group items together if you want to do that. So you give it a group name if you wanted to do that. And then you give it the binding configuration. And it just kind of depends what that binding configuration looks like would depend on the type of binding you're using. And if you go to the bindings page, each binding has a documentation page that you can go to that will tell you how to set up your items. So for instance, for my garage door opener, it communicates over HTTP. So my binding configuration would basically look like I would tell OpenHAB to use the HTTP binding, and I would tell it when the switch goes on, hit this URL. When the switch goes off, hit this other URL. And so that's how OpenHAB would know what to control and how to control it. So you've told it how to control things and what things you want to control. Now you need to tell it how to display that to the user. One way that you can do that is through something called a sitemap, which is just a basic description of how you want the various items you've got, how you want those laid out. And so I took this from their website. It's not really JSON, it's not really HTML, I don't really know what language you would call this, but it's not too complicated. You basically define sections that you want to display things in, and inside those things you tell it what items you want to display. And you can also nest those together so you can drill down into different items to control it. So that sitemap definition would look like this when OpenHAB reads it and displays it. So you've got the two sections. You can control this light right here, and then if you wanted to drill down into controlling more with this heating thing, you'd click that and it would open up a new screen to show those controls. And so the last thing I want to go over is rules, and this is kind of the fun part of home automation. This is where you get your stuff to interact with each other. So since my garage door is now controlled remotely, I kind of want to know when it opens and when it closes in case someone else decides to open or close it. I don't think they can do that, but if someone figures it out, I'd like to know. So this is a rule. You basically just say, hey, I'm starting a new rule and this is the name. You give it a trigger. And this particular trigger is a item-based trigger. So when this item called garage door status changes, then I want to do something. You can also do triggers based on, certain times or every X number of hours, stuff like that. So when the garage door status changes to closed, I want the notifier to send a message to my phone that says, hey, garage door's closed. And when it's open, I want to know that it opened. And there's the documentation at this URL here for rules kind of gives you all the different things you can do with rules, and you can get as complicated as you want with that. I just have lights in my house, and there's not really a whole lot I want to do to automate the lights. The only thing I've done with that is there's a binding for the Chromecast, which is how we watch most of our television, and so I've got a rule in there that says when the Chromecast starts playing, dim the lights in the living room, and when you pause it or stop playing, it brings the lights back up. So super useful. But that's about, I also want to mention for the rules and all the other configuration stuff, there's a Visual Studio Code extension that you can install that will give you some syntax highlighting and auto-completion type things to make editing those a little bit easier. You can, of course, just open up Notepad and edit them that way if you want, but this, especially when you're first learning, this kind of helps a little bit. And I think that's about it. And then I also wanted to maybe, just to show what the sitemap and the UI looks like. This is at my house right now. So this is how I have my sitemap set up. If I want to control lights, I just go here and I can either see the status of all of them, or I can drill down and then I can do thermostat and garage door opener, all that. So, I mean, and all that was pretty, to me, this UI looks pretty nice, and it was, all I had to do was define the sitemap and I got that UI. They made the UI layer swappable, so other people have made different UIs. There's a UI that you can use that has, you just get a blank slate and you can drag widgets onto that UI and define how they look and how they act and arrange them all perfectly to the pixel how you want them. I didn't really want to do that. This was functional enough and looked good enough, so I just went with that. That's it. Is there any questions? Is your garage door open? Let's go look. No, my garage door is not open, but now it is. And my dog is freaking out right now. So.
Do you know if there's a capability to have like a live camera feed on with this? Or is that too complicated?
I think, I don't know how live you could get it, because I mean it's got to go from where it's in your house through the cloud service to your phone or wherever you're looking at it. I haven't looked at that. There might be a binding for it. I'm sure someone else has wanted to do that, so there probably is a binding for it. Whether or not that will work with your specific model of IP camera that you got or whatever, I don't know. But
Yeah.